Good evening and welcome to This Week in Turkey. Clashes in Idlib have been ongoing this week. 5 more Turkish soldiers have been killed in a second attack by Syrian regime forces. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has reiterated his threats to retaliate against forces if harm continues to come to Turkey's troops.
President and ruling Justice and Development Party chair Recep Tayyip Erdogan has spoken at the weekly group meeting of his party on February 12. Erdogan has indicated that, as of today, if any harm comes to Turkey's troops at the observation posts or anywhere else, Turkey will hit the regime forces anywhere without limiting itself to Idlib and to the boundaries of the Sochi Memorandum. We will do this by any means necessary, by air or ground, without hesitating, he told members of his party. Meanwhile, Turkey's defense ministry said that its forces had killed 55 Syrian regime soldiers in Idlib. According to the latest information received from our sources in Idlib, 55 regime troops have been neutralized today, the Turkish Defense Ministry statement stated. The latest development comes in the wake of an attack by regime forces earlier this week that claimed the lives of 5 Turkish soldiers. The second attack followed an attack last week by regime forces that killed 7 Turkish soldiers and 1 civilian contractor working with the Turkish military. Turkey has set up 12 observation posts in Idlib as part of an agreement with Russia and Iran to establish what they call a de-escalation zone. This month, Ankara, which has the second largest army in NATO, has poured some 5,000 troops and convoys of military vehicles across the border into Idlib, including tanks, armored personnel carriers and radar equipment to bolster its positions.
Turkish and U.S. officials met on February 12 in the capital, Ankara, to discuss the latest developments in Syria.
Of the U.S. government for Turkish soldiers killed in Idlib in the regime attack. Other aspects of the Syrian problem, such as the humanitarian situation and the political process, were also discussed at the meeting, and it was underlined that the international community should play an active role in these issues. During his visit to Ankara, Jeffrey also held talks with Turkey's presidential spokesperson İbrahim Kalın. Targeting Turkish army's observation posts by the Assad regime in Idlib is unacceptable, Kalın and Jeffrey stressed. During the meeting, Turkey's determination on protecting Turkish soldiers and civilians as part of Idlib deal was also underlined. Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy in Ankara has posted a video on their Twitter account with the hashtag #EyesOnIdlib, condemning Russia, Iran and the Syrian regime forces for their ongoing attacks in Idlib and showing support and solidarity with Syrian citizens and Turkey. The video also calls for peace talks to commence once again. In response, the Russian Embassy in Ankara shared a visual with information regarding Pentagon's $200 million budget request for a unit of the YPG with 10,000 members.
This evening, retired diplomat and ambassador Faruk Loğoğlu is on our Skype line. Good evening, Mr. Loğoğlu. Thank you for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, Mr. Loğoğlu, this week, U.S. Representative for Syria, James Jeffrey, was in Turkey. He made a speech where he used the word martyr, şehit, in Turkish. After that, the U.S. Embassy posted a video on their Twitter account showing solidarity with Turkey, to which the Russian Embassy then responded with a visual from the Anadolu Agency relating to U.S. funding of the YPG. So how would you evaluate these online developments, and do you think that they are helpful in gaining over Turkish public opinion?
I think, to start from the bottom of your question, what I would like to say is that these messages being exchanged over the social media are not actually going to affect the Turkish public or of the Turkish government. But this is not to say that social media in its various forms is now an integral part of public everything, public diplomacy, public relations, and so forth and so on. But I think the effectiveness of such messages depend a lot on the particular culture in which they take place. As far as Turkey is concerned, I think, for example, the way spoke probably created more smiles than anything else. On the other hand, the Russian effort was more realistic. It was more visual. I think Turkish culture is more attuned to visual demonstrations rather than audio demonstrations.
Right. So, as you said, I mean, public diplomacy has always existed, and obviously, social media is nowadays the most widely used communication tool. So, it is important that this public diplomacy transfer to the online sphere. But do you think that it influences the seriousness of the messages? How do you think the content itself is affected by the means?
I think what is important about these messages is that it really says something about the attitude, the position of the messenger, of those who emit, who send the messages. So under these circumstances, Turkey has the right, for example, to say to their American counterparts on such and such a day, this is what you said over the social media, so you must deliver upon those messages. So it has, I think it is more binding, more on those who send the messages than on those who are supposed to affect. In this case, American messages bind the Americans more than the Turkish people. The Russian messages bind the Russians more than the Turkish people.
So, well, through these messages that we've been following on Twitter, what we've come to understand is that the U.S. is supporting Turkey vis-a-vis the situation in Idlib. Now, during the NATO meeting in Brussels earlier this week, the Ministry of Defense of Turkey tweeted that the defense ministers of Turkey and the USA met in Brussels and spoke about the developments in Idlib. However, the Voice of America correspondent for the Pentagon also wrote something regarding this meeting, actually saying that it was, that the ministers had only shook hands and that there wasn't actually a concrete meeting. So do you think that this support is actually concrete? And what do you think it implies when, this kind of contrary information is then shared online?
This is, of course, a very important question. On the one hand, the Turkish side says there was a meeting between the two ministers. On the other side, the American side says it was only a handshake. So who are you to believe? I think what is important here is that Turkey is over the situation in Idlib. The American supposed support for Turkey in regard to the situation in Idlib is not really very credible, because it is at the same time that in the American fiscal budget for next year, demonstrated of almost $200 million for PYD/YPG elements in Syria. So the U.S. is saying, on the one hand, I'm going to continue assisting, providing aid and arms to PYD/YPG, but I support you over Idlib. I think the reason why they are so eager to express support and solidarity with Turkey over the situation in Idlib is because they see a gap widening in Turkish positions. So basically, the Americans are trying to put a wedge into Turkish-Russian cooperation over Syria and over Idlib in particular, because the differences between Russia and Turkey over Idlib are very real. So the Americans are exploiting this situation to their advantage.
And so in regards to that, Mr. Loolu, do you think that, I mean, for example, James Jeffrey's speech this week where he spoke in Turkish and used the word şehit, martyr, knowing that the Anadolu Agency, which is a state-run news agency, but which has come to be the mouthpiece for government policies, would pick up on it. So do you think that there's a conscious play towards towards the media, the Turkish media?
Certainly, certainly. But I think even the Turkish, even the media in Turkey that supports the Justice and Development Party in power in Turkey, does not find this very credible. It's too obvious what the Americans are trying to do. And while it may sound sweet to our ears, I think most people were probably laughing at the Turkish spoken by Jim Jeffrey. And I think the Americans are very naive in using such instruments for getting their views across. I witnessed this many times while I was serving as ambassador in the U.S. Even the most fundamental things they can miss about different countries, including Turkey. So I think it's just with a smile that we have to encounter, we have to respond, react to what Ambassador Jeffrey was trying to do. But I think the real aim, the real American aim, is to widen the gap between Turkish and Russian positions in Syria and over Idlib.
And lastly, Mr. Loolu, I'd like to ask you, what do you think of Turkey's increasing aggressive stance in its diplomacy? I mean, this week, as you know, President Erdogan reiterated his threats against potential more harm potentially coming to Turkish soldiers in Syria and whatnot. So, what do you make of this line of action? Have diplomatic solutions been exhausted?
I hope not, but I think the statements emerging from Ankara, in particular from President Erdogan, and the corresponding counter messages coming from Syria, from Damascus, are escalating the tension. We are definitely facing a serious situation. The possibility of a direct confrontation between Turkish armed forces and the Syrian army. Not only are we talking about the position and counter-position of the Turkish and Syrian sides, but we have Russia that's accusing Turkey of not fulfilling its obligations under the Sochi agreement. And we have, on the other hand, the Americans who are encouraged to take arms against Bashar Assad. So Turkey is really caught in a bind, and this is the time Ankara must really cool down, and I think look at where Turkey stands. I think the solution is not with the Russians. The solution is not with the Americans. The Turkish soldiers are there, and Bashar Assad should know that if any further harm comes to the Turkish soldiers in Syria, the Turkey has no option but to respond. But Turkey must also realize, as the Russian ambassador said recently, the Russian ambassador in Ankara said that the Syrian army is trying to regain its own territory. That too is a very basic truth. So what do we have? Two options for Turkey. Either continue the military option, amassing further and further forces on the Turkish-Syrian border and in the Idlib area, or prefer the diplomatic road, diplomatic option. Yeah. And I think it makes more sense for Ankara and for Damascus to come together to resolve all these issues, not just Idlib, but all the other issues. For example, there is always talk of, even with regard to the situation in Idlib now, that perhaps a modus vivendi can be reached between Turkey and Russia, creating a sort of a smaller secure zone, safe zone in the north of Idlib. I always said that safe zones of any kind in the west, in the east, in the south of Syria are not the answer, are not the solution to the problem of Syria. Not safe zones, but a safe Syria is the answer. So we must put all our energies in creating a stable, secure, and peaceful Syria, and this requires that Ankara talk with Damascus and that Damascus talk with Ankara.
Mr. Loolu, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your assessment.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Former Prime Minister of Turkey, Ahmet Davutoğlu, who has established a new political party, the Future Party, in December 2019, was the guest of Medyascope Editor-in-Chief Ruşen Çakır and Editorial Coordinator Sedat Pişirici. Davutoğlu responded to Çakır and Pişirici's questions regarding his fallout with President Erdogan and the obstacles he faced while establishing his new party.
Şimdi ben geriye doğru dönüp baktığımda çok daha soğukkanlı bir değerlendirme
yaptım. When I look back, I'm able to conduct a cold-blooded evaluation. Many say this is related to my dispute with President Erdogan. When I left the AKP, this is what I was thinking. There was a variety of factors that caused our relationship to go sour. I have principles. The president has certain requests. Both of these are in conflict with one another. I told him, let us come out with the law of transparency. He tells me I would not be able to find a provincial head who would support it. I said, let's come out with a law on political ethics. I am told not to send it to parliament. I say freedom of expression and insist on these matters. But somehow we are unable to get along and there is a separation. Honestly, it came to the point where my person was being offended and violated. I was accused of being a German spy, me, a person who has served his country not from abroad, but from within the nation, with all of his efforts and willpower. I know how this accusation was made and the instructions behind it. It comes to a point where, in order to protect the relationship, one side has to make a sacrifice. I made a sacrifice and took a step back. I assumed things would get better eventually. That these claims President Erdogan believed to be true relating to me and him being in the race for leadership would die down and our relationship, both on a personal level and on a diplomatic level, would be protected. It was the AKP that degenerated, not me, not my colleagues. Those who have established a party with me have not been accused of corruption. If that had been the case, we would have looked into the accusation. If you remember, I was accused of being a cheater, a fraud by the president. I couldn't believe it, both in terms of our personal relationship as well as in terms of diplomacy. I said to myself, sometime one can lose a sense of conscience, but to lose one's mind? It seemed really incomprehensible as an accusation. I don't know if he's afraid of me or not. I wouldn't want to say anything like that, but I said that day that if it was necessary, that all my first and second degree relatives' assets be investigated. Why would one conduct fraud? In order to obtain something? Well, then let them do their investigation. I am ready to give an account to Parliament. I said I was ready to face the Supreme Court. Everyone should be ready, actually. All the politicians of this country should be ready to explain themselves in all transparency to the Supreme Court. I trust the Future Party. This is not only related to my trust towards myself and my fellow colleagues, but also a trust relating to the natural process of forming a party, even though it was a difficult process. It was difficult because there was a lot of pressure on us. All of our founding members who have businesses have had difficulties with their public finances, audits and so forth. Of course, I'm not talking about legitimate audits done in the required time, but I am talking about targeted audits towards specific people and very particular times. This is another level. Most of our colleagues whose partners are civil servants suffered. Nonetheless, 152 courageous people said, "We are here." They are determined to fight against these injustices. What affected me most after the process of establishing a party was that those who came to congratulate me would all say, "Sir, we applaud you and your team's bravery." If establishing a party in a country is associated with bravery, then this is quite negative for the country, even if those demonstrating that bravery are seen positively.
Ama o ülke için çok negatif bir şey.
Main opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has accused President Erdogan of surrendering the state to the Gülenist movement.
Gülenists are widely thought to have played a key role in a coup attempt against Erdogan's government in July 2016. After the coup, more than 100,000 public sector workers were dismissed over alleged links to the Gülen movement, and thousands were arrested. But politicians are markedly absent among the victims of purges. But the formerly friendly relationship between the AKP and the religious movement came back on the agenda this month when a former Turkish Chief of General Staff, İlker Başbuğ, accused AKP lawmakers of drafting legislation in 2009 that allowed Gülenist members of the judiciary to prosecute military officers in civilian courts. Başbuğ was one of hundreds of secularist officers investigated for creating an illegal clandestine organization to overthrow the AKP government in trials that Erdogan later admitted were a plot. Erdogan responded to Başbuğ's comments by calling on his party's lawmakers to file lawsuits against the ex-military chief for insulting public officials. The AKP and its coalition partners voted down a bill demanding an investigation into the political wing of the Gülen movement. Kılıçdaroğlu kept the heat on the ruling party at a speech to his parliamentary party on Tuesday, saying that after coming to power as PM in 2003, Erdogan had neglected a warning by Turkey's National Security Council that the Gülen movement was dangerous and should be treated as a terrorist organization. Kılıçdaroğlu further stated that in the years after Erdogan and the AKP took office, the Gülen movement infiltrated vital state institutions, including the security forces, judiciary and military. Kılıçdaroğlu said, "I say infiltrated, but they were placed there. They put FETÖ operatives in the most sensitive institutions of the state one by one. The Turkish parliament was used as a means to implement FETÖ's demands. This paved the way for mass appointments of Gülenists to the state institutions." In response, President Erdogan has filed a suit for non-pecuniary damages against Kılıçdaroğlu, requesting 500,000 Turkish liras from Kılıçdaroğlu due to his speech. Submitting the lawsuit petition to the Penal Court of First Instance on behalf of his client, attorney Hüseyin Aydın has indicated that the personal rights of Erdogan were gravely violated by the remarks of Kılıçdaroğlu.
President Erdogan said on Tuesday that the treasury will take over a 28% stake in İşBank, the country's largest listed lender, from the main opposition Republican People's Party.
Erdogan has said in the past that the stake, which was bequeathed to the CHP by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, founder of the Turkish Republic, will be moved to the treasury. Political parties do not have the right or authority to take part in banking activities, Erdogan told reporters following a parliamentary speech to his AKP party's lawmakers. Erdogan's comment knocked 6% off İşbank's share price. The CHP, which appoints 4 members to İşbank's board, opposes the move by Erdogan, who said that Atatürk had bequeathed the stake to the treasury, not the party. At 28.1%, the CHP's holding is worth around 7.32 billion liras, based on İşbank's market capitalization of some 26.04 billion liras. The CHP has said that its members of the İşbank board and the party do not get a dividend payout from the bank.
Ahead of the 6th hearing of the Gezi trial to be held on February 18, the Taksim Solidarity Platform held a statement for the press at the Union of Chambers of Turkish Engineers and Architects in Istanbul on February 11.
Reading out the statement for the press regarding the judicial process of Gezi trial, Mücella Yapıcı said, "If they are looking for a culprit, then they should look for it in the deaths of Berkin Elvan, Ethem Sarısülük, Abdullah Cömert, Ali İsmail Korkmaz, Mehmet Ayvalıtaş, Medeni Yıldırım, Hasan Ferit Gedik, and Ahmet Atakan." Yapıcı concluded the statement by saying, "We have defended and will defend Gezi." Cevahir Efe Akçelik from the Union of Chambers of Turkish Engineers and Architects, Istanbul Provincial Council and Turkish Medical Chamber underscored that they regarded the judicial process as a violation of law and stated the following. What the AKP expects from this case is to put pressure on society and to criminalize the opposition based on its self-proclaimed definition of terrorism and the rubbish of external powers that it has not abandoned for 18 years. Gezi signifies the will of laying claim to the tree, forest, public space, human rights and freedoms in this land. What makes the AKP afraid is the will of collective life. We will keep on claiming this right. Can Atalay, the attorney of Chamber of Architects, underlined that no one could face charges or stand trial because they fulfilled their responsibilities stemming from their professions. What brought millions side by side in Gezi was the roughness of Erdogan government as well as the determination and resolution of millions of citizens to claim their own fates. We did not and we will not bow to the criminalization of Gezi resistance or to the disregard of the law. The prosecutor of the Gezi trial had requested an aggravated life sentence for 3 defendants, Osman Kavala, Mücella Yapıcı, and Yiğit Aksakoğlu. Businessperson Osman Kavala is the only defendant who is behind bars in the 16-defendant case. The European Court of Human Rights ruled on December 10 that he shall be acquitted. Despite the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights, prosecutor Edip Şahiner requested the continuation of his 228-day imprisonment. Civil society figure Yiğit Aksakoğlu had also served 221 days in prison until he was released in June 2019.
Both President Erdogan and Justice Minister Gül have weighed in on the case of Kadir Şeker, who was jailed over killing the abusive boyfriend of a woman when he was trying to save her from getting beaten in the central Anatolian province of Konya.
The incident happened on February 5. Şeker, a 20-year-old prospective medical faculty student, saw a woman, identified as 35-year-old Ayşe D, crying and getting beaten up by her abusive boyfriend Özgür Duran, who has 19 criminal records over deliberately injuring, theft, looting and dealing drugs. Şeker approached the scene to warn the man to stop, only to be met with insults. Then they started scuffling, ended up with Duran dropping dead after being stabbed by a knife in his heart. He started running towards me and punched me in the right eye. I remember that he kept hitting my face. He then started to choke me and I couldn't breathe. I reached to my pocket knife, Şeker said in his testimony afterwards, adding that he was trying to get away from Duran during the brawl. However, Ayşe D changed her initial statement. She stated that actually her boyfriend Duran was not beating her up and that they were only arguing. President Erdogan has said that the action of Şeker was undertaken with humane and conscientious concerns. Kadir Şeker has exhibited a humane and conscientious stance. The process after this is completely up to the judiciary. We hope that a fair decision is reached, Erdogan told reporters on February 12. Justice Minister Abdülhamit Gül also made a statement recording the Şeker case saying, "No one can say Kadir is guilty, but there is a dead body in the open." Gül told reporters that the trial process will show if the murder was generated by unjust provocation or was an act of self-defense. Or if there is a different situation, this will be revealed after the investigation. Judges and prosecutors are just like us human beings. They also have conscience, and within the framework of evidences, they will complete the investigation, he said. Gül also said that the incarceration of Şeker does not mean that he is guilty. Şeker has been arrested pending trial as a precautionary measure, Gül said. Thousands of social media users have called for justice for Şeker, tweeting with the hashtags Justice for Kadir and Kadir is innocent, in which people pinpointed to the fact that he saved a woman from getting killed.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.